Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most infamous disasters in business history. It's the story of a video game so bad, it quite literally ended up buried in a desert landfill. So, let's start with the question that's been an urban legend in the gaming world for decades. Did Atari, at the absolute peak of its power, really take millions of copies of its biggest holiday game and dump them in the middle of the desert? The story just sounds too wild to be true. But it wasn't a story. It was very, very real. Back in September of 1983, a bunch of trucks drove out to a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico, late at night. And what were they carrying? Thousands and thousands of unsold Atari cartridges. They were just dumped, crushed by a bulldozer, and then covered with a layer of concrete to seal the deal. For more than 30 years, most people just thought it was a myth, a funny story about corporate failure. But then, in 2014, a documentary crew decided to go and find out for themselves. They started digging. And wouldn't you know it, there they were, hundreds of dusty, crushed copies of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The legend was officially a fact. So how on earth does a company get to the point of burying its own brand new product? Well, it wasn't just one bad call. It was a perfect storm of incredible success, blinding overconfidence, and a total failure to understand what their customers actually wanted. To really get this, you have to picture what Atari was like in 1982. They weren't just a company, they were on top of the world, totally dominating the market. And inside the company, there was this feeling that they were invincible. This belief that people would buy literally anything with an Atari logo on it, no matter how good or bad it was. And this is where things get really crazy. Atari spent months and millions negotiating the rights to the E.T. movie. But by the time they finally signed the deal in late July, they gave their star programmer, a guy named Howard Scott Warshaw, an absolutely insane deadline. He had just 5 weeks. 5 weeks! To build an entire blockbuster game from scratch, just to make sure it was on shelves for Christmas. And that feeling of invincibility, it went all the way down the line. When the CEO asked Warshaw if he could actually do it, his answer was, "You bet I can." He said later that he was just overflowing with confidence, or, as he put it, hubris. The whole company just assumed they could pull it off. But, there were red flags. Big ones. Warshaw wanted to make something new and ambitious, not just another clone. But when he explained his pretty complicated idea to Steven Spielberg himself, even the director was skeptical. He basically asked, hey, why can't you just make it simple, like Pac-Man? The ambition was there, but with that deadline, it was a recipe for disaster. So you take that crazy overconfidence, you add that ridiculous deadline, and you get a full-blown economic catastrophe. Seriously, this whole story is now a textbook example of what happens when a company completely misunderstands the basic principles of supply and demand. Just look at this number, 5 million. That's how many E.T. game cartridges Atari produced. Now, to put that into perspective, they made more copies of the game than there were even Atari consoles out in the world at the time. It was a massive, massive gamble based entirely on movie hype. And that's the classic mistake, right? Atari thought the hype around the movie would automatically translate into genuine demand. They were expecting the biggest hit of the holiday season. But the reality? Oh, man. The reality was a game that was confusing, frustrating. It's been called a purgatory simulator, where the main thing you do is fall into pits, over and over again. Word got out fast that the game was terrible, and demand just vanished. The numbers tell the whole story. It sold a little bit at first, about 1.5 million copies, but pretty soon the returns started. A staggering 3.5 million cartridges were either returned by angry customers or just sent back by stores because they couldn't sell them. They all came flooding back to Atari. And that flood of returns created something that supply chain experts call the bullwhip effect. Imagine it. Retailers see the game isn't selling, so they panic and cancel all their future orders. That panic gets amplified back to the distributors, who then panic and cancel their orders. And the end of that chain reaction, there's Atari, getting smacked by the end of the whip, holding millions of games nobody on Earth wanted. Now here's the really crucial point. This wasn't just a disaster for one game, or even for just one company. The fallout from the E.T. fiasco sent shockwaves through the entire video game industry. $100 million. That's the rough estimate of what Atari lost on the E.T. game alone. When you combine that with some of their other low-quality games around that time, it was a financial hit that the company just could not recover from. And this, right here, is the bigger picture. The failure of ET became the symbol for a market that was just saturated with rushed, low-quality junk. Consumer trust completely evaporated. People just stopped buying video games altogether, and the whole industry crashed. In just 2 years, the industry's revenue dropped from over $3 billion to about $100 million. That's a 97% drop. It's staggering. So what did we learn from all this? I mean, why are we still talking about a 40-year-old business failure today? Well, because the core mistakes that Atari made are absolutely still being made. This whole problem of overproduction based on hype, it's not ancient history. Take a look at Funko in 2023. It's the same exact story, just a different decade. They saw the hype around their collectibles, ramped up production, and then demand cooled off. Just like Atari, they were left with a modern-day landfill, millions of dollars worth of figures they literally had to throw away. So the lessons from Atari's disaster are timeless for any business. First off, hype does not equal demand. It can get you attention, but it's not the same thing. Second, product quality is everything. You can't trick customers forever. A bad product will always be found out. Third, you've got to forecast with real data, not just an overconfident gut feeling. And finally, you have to be agile enough to manage your inventory and react when reality doesn't match your forecast. But there's a really fascinating final chapter to this story. Howard Scott Warshaw, the guy who was haunted for decades for creating the, quote, worst game ever. He eventually left the industry. And today, he's a successful psychotherapist in Silicon Valley, helping a new generation of tech engineers deal with the exact kind of immense pressure and insane deadlines that he went through. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our world of nonstop hype cycles and a move fast and break things mentality, where is the next ET disaster brewing? And what's the next great cautionary tale being written right now?